So in December of that year, probably after a final Christmas with their extended families, Robert, Helen and their children left Melrose on the first stage of their journey to Australia. Helen was again pregnant. It was, of course, midwinter, and a journey by coach or wagon would have been very cold and uncomfortable, particularly for those riding in the cheaper seats, braving the elements. The journey from Melrose took them over the hills of Northumberland to Newcastle and then on to Leeds, Manchester and Liverpool. In Liverpool, their ship, the Formosa, had been forced into the wharf by a storm, and its departure was delayed for 3 weeks while repairs were made. Finally, on the 18th of January 1839, along with 250 other passengers, they set sail. Being bounty passengers, the Wallaces and Broomfields would have travelled in steerage, enduring cramped conditions, poor ventilation, meagre rations, and virtually no privacy. On the 21st of March, they reached Cape Town. Due to an outbreak of measles and smallpox on shore, the passengers were not permitted to leave the ship. 12 days later, on the 2nd of April, they sailed on into the Indian Ocean. Between Cape Town and the east coast of Australia, they encountered only 2 other ships. One of these had been damaged in a storm and had lost most of its provisions. Under the law of the sea, the Formosa would have shared what it had. From then on, rations in steerage must have been very thin indeed. During the 4-month journey, 1 passenger was lost overboard, and whooping cough took the lives of 15 children and 1 sailor. One of those children was 3-year-old Alexander Broomfield. In the same period, 8 children were born. On the 20th of May, no doubt with great relief, they reached Sydney, and the newspapers at the time reported that it was a fine sunny day. More likely that they travelled by paddle steamer, possibly on the Tamar, the Sophia Jane, or the William IV, all of which were operating at the time. After a call at Newcastle, they would have proceeded up the Hunter River to the village of Morpeth. On arrival on Dunmore, they would have joined other workers, who were accommodated in simple timber huts located next to the river. This building, which served as the first schoolhouse at nearby Largs, was originally one of the workers' cottages on Dunmore. This smaller hut is the last of the workers' houses on the original site. Most childbirths on the property took place in this outbuilding of Dunmore House, in what was then the kitchen. In the meantime, Robert would have been set to work on the property, but we don't know in what capacity. Just over 2 years later, on the 13th of September 1841, another daughter, Helen, was born. Unfortunately, Helen the mother became ill after the birth. She would have been nursed here in the dining room of Dunmore House until, on the 15th of January 1842, this little cemetery stands in memory of Helen and of 2 others who died in those early years. Belle's mother's ashes are also scattered here. On Helen's death, Robert placed his 5 children in the care of other families. Not long after, he set off droving cattle over the mountains from the Monaro district to the newly explored region of Gippsland in Victoria. In 1847, before commencing another cattle drive to the south, he made a visit to Dunmore. When he left, he was accompanied by his sons, William, aged 14, and Ferguson, aged 12. Due to the tyranny of distance, Robert was to see his daughters only one more time, at Nancy's wedding to Robert Broomfield. The boys were not to see their sisters again. Those early years in Australia would not have been a happy period in our family's history. Nonetheless, Robert did not live without hopes and dreams. One of these would have been realised when some years later he became the first of his family to stand upon his own piece of land.